The most important work of your life is the work you do within your soul. This is Home Improvement for the Soul.
Hello, and welcome to Home Improvement for the Soul, a very, very special edition of Home Improvement for the Soul. The wonderful spiritual psychologist and Kabbalist Tal Mendelbaum Ben Moshe has agreed to join us from Israel to take a look at what is going on. What can we all do with this situation in the world that is affecting all of us, the war in Israel, between Hamas and Israel. And I'm going to turn it right over to Tal with a beautiful intention for this particular podcast. So, Tal, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us. And thank you to your family for giving up their time with you. And I know it's bedtime for the kids because they have school tomorrow. So let's just give it to you right now.
Thank you, Maddie. I'm always happy to talk to you and be on your show. And yeah, I wanted to start with an intention because having an intention for everything we do is always a good thing. And so I want to ask to pray that our talk today will open up our hearts and give us hope and show us the way to our personal power to influence our reality for the better, that together we will feel the light of our Creator and the goodness that He wants to show to us, that He's guiding us towards, even as we see a lot of darkness in our world. I would like for this conversation to guide us towards the light that is what is truly behind everything that happens to us. So
beautiful. Amen.
Amen.
So Tal, I guess the first thing I really would like to know is how are you? How are the people there in Israel feeling about everything that's going on? What are you hearing? What do you feel? What is happening in your family, in your life?
Right. Well, that is a complicated question because it's constantly changing. I guess at the beginning it's really a state of shock, and it was very intense emotionally. There was a lot of fear. Still is. I mean, there still is. But as human beings, we tend to get used to even the worst circumstances. But the 7th of October was a huge shock for all of us.
Yeah.
Now we've got the IDF is at work protecting us, and so there's a slight more sense of control, and yet we're all quite aware that the situation we're in, the danger that we're in, is really far beyond what we ever were willing to acknowledge. So there's a lot of tension in the air, and yet because I'm a spiritual person and as part of a spiritual community, this really helps to have a higher perspective on everything. And still, I feel almost recruited. Like, there's some people who are fighting physically, but I feel like I'm recruited to a different kind of defense of my country, which is more in thoughts, in prayer, in my inner work, and also in spreading the solution, the higher solution to the situation, which of course is not a military solution, but we're probably going to be discussing what it is. It's something that is more a matter of our consciousness and our development as human beings. So that's why I'm here as a part of my recruitment for this
I love
cause
that.
of peace.
Well, yeah. I feel like those of us who are on the spiritual path are being recruited. We are being recruited. We are being challenged, certainly, to remain in a space where we can use this spirituality for the betterment of everyone, so that we can raise the level of consciousness in the world to a point where this never has to happen again. I think that I love you did a post about people wanting to relocate, and there are a lot of people leaving Israel now out of fear. And you talked about relocating in place, and I love that. I remember once, I'm just going to bring this up quickly, but I remember once Tom Porter, who's the spiritual leader of the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee that we work with, and somebody asked him when he was staying at the Mohawk community called Ganajohalege, where they had been given back their traditional land. They haven't been on that particular piece of land for the last maybe, 400 years. So it was given back to them by a group of people that actually bought this land when it was for sale by New York State and gave it back to the Mohawk people. And he stayed, and a lot of people came and went, and he and his family stayed. And when somebody asked him, why are you staying? Why don't you just go back to the reservation? It's so hard here to make this work and to get people in and to explain to them why you're here. And he said, well, because if I don't do it, who will? If I don't hold this spiritual space, if I don't stay here and make sure that the spirit of my people lives here, who is going to do it? So I thought of that immediately when I heard your translation of the post that you put up about relocating in place. So I was wondering if maybe you could explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I have a few things to say about that. I mean, first, I guess, it's about being here because I believe there's a higher goal to us being here in Israel. It's not about the land. It's really about the cause, which I think, unfortunately, most Israelis are not so conscious of. I think I can talk about this for hours, really, because, we came here to Israel as a kind of safe haven from anti-Semitism some 75 years ago. And to this day, most people see it as a kind of place for the Jews, but it's become a really regular westernized country with, capitalistic country without much of a higher goal. The goal that used to unite us, which was the goal to build the state of Israel and to keep it alive. And in the beginning, it was under existential threat, but the more comfortable we became, it just became more of a capitalistic Western life with nothing much to unite us beyond our enemies and the anti-Semitism, of course. And so being here, I know, because I study Kabbalah, I've delved into the deeper spiritual texts and roots of our nation. I know that Israel is not just supposed to be a regular country, but it has a higher purpose. It has a higher goal, which is to fulfill the goal of the Jewish people, which is to transform our own internal egoism into love of others, to correct human nature, and to give a model of true peace to the world. This is our Torah. Our Torah, its highest law is love thy friend or neighbor as thyself. And so the Kabbalists tell us that Israel was founded for this purpose. And as long as we're not living this purpose, we're not living our higher goal, we're both extremely divided. Nobody really knows why we're here, except for surviving the different enemies that we have. And then also the world doesn't feel like Israel has a right to exist because we're not giving what we're supposed to be giving to the world. So I went right into the crux of it, I think, the meat of it. So I'm here in Israel because I know this, because I know that it's not about the land, it's about the higher purpose.
Right.
I also know that there's really no safe place for Jews in the world, if we're honest about it. I mean, anti-Semitism is everywhere. Right. Jews are feeling unsafe everywhere. And I know that the higher plan will not let Jews get comfortable anywhere because of this mission that we have. And lastly, I'll just conclude this with the third point that I wanted to talk about is I think that the shift that wants to happen throughout humanity, not just for Jews, but for everybody, is not a physical shift. I mean, we're done changing or moving around things on the physical level.
Right.
It's now this time in humanity's evolution to begin a shift inwardly and upwards into a higher level of consciousness so that we can make changes in our corporeality and in our corporeal lives that are probably going to be effective. But in the end, if we don't shift internally, then we're not going to find solutions to the problems that reality is throwing at us right now, because it's already a time in our evolution where we're being pushed into these higher levels of consciousness. So I know a lot of people who are relocating and trying to find safety elsewhere and some sort of calm or peace of mind elsewhere. And I just personally know that maybe it will give them some sense of security for a little while, but if we don't fix the problem at the root, we're not going to be safe or happy anywhere.
I totally agree. I think one of the things I found most impressive when I did the Kabbalah retreat was the whole discussion of love thy neighbor as thyself, love thy friend as thyself. And I think that when we look at that concept and how that applies to everyone in the world, we do find that that holding that in your heart and then reaching out to your enemy, reaching out to someone who disagrees with you is where we raise consciousness. That sometimes they're not going to reach back. So that's the problem. I think that's the difficulty that people have, is then they ask, well, what happens if you reach out and they slap you in the face? So that's what I kind of wanted to see what your reaction is, what a Kabbalist would say to that. So you reach out to your enemy and they slap you in the face or they kill you, or they want to kill your family. They don't want to hear you. They don't want to connect with you.
So this is a really important differentiation I think you're raising here that we have to make, because I think there's been this great movement, mostly of the left, towards peace with our enemy. And this was very much the case here in Israel. We have this huge peace movement in Israel for many years. And even the people who were murdered on the 7th of October were these kibbutzim, right? Where there's mostly a leftist population, a lot of peace activists, people I personally knew who were doing so much for Palestinians, trying to create better conditions of life for them and investing a lot of thought into it. And yet they were murdered. They're like the first to be murdered. It's really atrocious to think about it. But I think this comes to teach us that it's not enough to want to reach out to your enemy, like you were saying. That's not the correction that wants to take place. The correction that wants to take place is that we correct the enemy inside our hearts, our internal hater or hatred, our egoism. Right. And this is something that we have to work on in our closest relationships and in our communities, in our spiritual group, right? Our spiritual group, and then in our communities within Israel, because we haven't done that. We have not created peace between left wing and right wing. We were at war with each other just before this happened. And so the external enemy is just the mirror of our internal hatred towards each other. And so we can try and fix the mirror as much as we want, but if we don't fix what the mirror is showing us, then we're not going to succeed. And this is what's actually very difficult, because oftentimes it's easier to feel sorry for your enemy and go out and help them than to actually rise above your ego and connect with your fellow Jew who thinks differently from you, who's right-wing, or, and this is where the ego really makes it difficult. And that's where our work is. That's where that higher level of consciousness can be found.
Exactly. And I think that is exactly the message that we have to hear here in the United States. I mean, that we're mirroring you. I mean, we're right and left. We refuse to hear each other. We just flat out refuse. And we just call each other names, and we just create tension and, cancel culture, all of that going on. And we just seem to have a really hard time listening. I was listening to the song right before I got here. I was listening to the song, The Sound of Silence, which sort of feeds into, it just popped up on my Pandora. And it sort of feeds into that whole idea that the left shouts out a lot. Silence is complicity. Sometimes silence is not complicity. Often it is not. Often you're silent because you're listening. And often you're silent because you're listening to your inner voice. If you never take the time to be silent and really listen inside and then listen to the other, then how do you ever solve things other than by going to war? So when the Haudenosaunee look at, and I know I bring this up all the time, you and me, because it always reflects back to me, to things that we're taught, in that when the peacemaker said to the 5 original nations, if you want peace, you have to bury your weapons of war. But along with your weapons of war, you have to bury the hatred and greed in your hearts. Because wherever there is hatred and greed, there will never be peace. And there's so much, as I've talked to you, learned more about Kabbalah, there's so much in these teaching that talks about where you have to go into your own heart and your own soul.
Yes, that's right. There's even this line in Hebrew that says that one has to stop their mouth in a time of anger. You have to, to be a hero is to overcome your own evil inclination. To be a hero is to be able to not lash out at someone when you're angry. And it really points back that real heroism is against your internal enemy. That's the true hero, one who can correct their own attitude. Right.
And when you look at the Sufi interpretation of Islam, then that's what they exactly say a jihad is. The jihad talks about you going inside and you correcting your internal battle. You're just what you were talking about with Kabbalah, your internal hatred. And the sad thing is that many Muslims do not even look at Sufis as being Muslims. The ones in power, they're just as persecuted in their own countries as we are in those countries, because they are looking at the more elevated interpretation of what they're hearing in the Quran. So they're very often not even accepted by their own people. So it's a very interesting dichotomy going on there.
Because it is interesting, because at the root of all religions is this one method, which is really based on the law of nature, which is the law of connection, the law of love and oneness. And so all of the sages that discovered these laws, they knew the same principles, and the Native Americans, the same principles of nature, of interconnectedness, of interdependence, of how we have to learn how to love each other to be in alignment with nature. And so you see this in all of the internal wisdoms that are really within the religions and are hidden, behind all the egoistic interpretations that we see today. And also Kabbalists, by the way, were not mainstream and were not accepted by the religious institutions throughout the millennia of exile. And this, I think, is our challenge. Our challenge is to uncover these internal wisdoms within Judaism, within Islam, and get people to unite around these internal principles. And so in Israel, I started by talking about how we've become this kind of westernized, capitalistic culture without connection to our roots. And so you have this very secular population in Israel that wants like a Western democracy that is disconnected from religion or anything like that. And then you've got the Orthodox or religious Jews that are still kind of living the customs of Judaism as they've been developed throughout the exile, with a disconnect from the internal wisdom. And so this is creating this, and it was creating this huge clash in Israeli society. And what we're trying to figure out is our true identity. And I feel like that identity revolves around that internal wisdom that we carry, which is neither secular, but also it's not religious in the religious, what we've come to see as religion. It's a spiritual, higher consciousness. I think also the most liberal method that we can think of, because it's totally universal. And I believe that if Jews can connect to their universal method of connection, which they have been carrying, then Arabs will connect to that as well, because we are spiritually very close. We come from Abraham, and we can take upon ourselves the same wisdom and the same goal. But I do think that Jews have to give this kind of example by doing it first. And then I'm sure that Arabs will join, and that this is the way to peace.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think it is so hard. It is always, like Kabbalah teaches, it's always that ego. It's so hard to let go of the I'm right, you're wrong. You know, I just to pull out another quote from the Peacemaker, because what I love about it, and I just did a series of 3 podcasts on this. What I love the most about the way the Peacemaker taught is he always said, if you want peace, it's your choice. I'm not telling you that you have to make this choice. I'm telling you these are the ground rules. If you want peace, you have to decide, do you want to be right or do you want to be fair? And in their version of fairness, and when the Peacemaker also says, if you want peace, everyone's voice must be heard. Heard, fair, means that we are listening with our hearts. That we are overriding the ego. So when you are listening to somebody, you're really, really hearing them. And it's interesting how in their government, when somebody speaks an idea that they might have for a law, then there is silence that follows that for a period of time, so that everybody in the room can digest that, can think about what's been said, and then that will affect your next statement. If we always remain in this position of anger and ego, what somebody else says, we're not really hearing. And we're not going to be able to make any correction. We're not going to be able to get to that fairness. And it's really, and it's not an easy process, but it's a necessary process. It's definitely necessary. I definitely agree with that. The Kabbalistic approach that until we make these corrections, things in the world will push us and push us and push us. And this is the war between Israel and Hamas is one of those big shoves.
Yes, that was beautiful what you just said, and I could really feel through your description how they were giving space for higher wisdom, for the interconnected wisdom of nature to reside within them, as they were giving space to hear each other. And I think that's what we need to understand, that we as human beings, we're small and we don't really know who we are and what this life is and what it's all about. And we have to connect to a higher wisdom, the higher wisdom of nature, of this system of which we're all part. And we do that by, like you're saying, by overcoming that ego that we have that makes us feel like we're in control, that we know best, and trying to coerce our opinions and our thoughts on other people and on our world, and really giving space for higher wisdom to come through. And so we have to learn. And by the way, that's the difference between this unity that we have to achieve and the unity that the communists try to achieve.
Right.
Because they never made space for nature, for God, for a higher power to glue them together, to make this connection work. It was all done through the ego and through coercion. And so that's why it never worked. Whereas we need to draw this higher level of consciousness into our world that will enable peace, that will help peace happen. And I just want to tell you a little something nice that I read the other day of how we were ultra divided here in Israel before Hamas attacked. And then I read this this beautiful post that somebody was writing about how in the tanks that in Gaza, there's, Israeli soldiers that come from all the different opinions in Israeli society, and they are finding themselves fighting side by side and connecting above their differences. And this war, especially for those soldiers that are now a few hundred thousands of soldiers that are now fighting, it's become like this kind of big connection event, because they have to be together, and when you're fighting together against an enemy, you feel how much you need each other, and you can easily go above those rifts. And so he was talking about how they're hoping that when they come back from the war, Israel will never go back to the same internal fighting that we were having. And so it's like you're saying that Hamas attacked, and like I said at the beginning, that behind every darkness is a light. It's really where it's written that we're the creator, where God gives us a blow, that's where he heals us. So we can really see in Israel how this has been healing us. It's been bringing us together. It's been helping us rise above our egos and feel that we need one another. And I think it's going to be a huge challenge for Israel to maintain this unity, even as hopefully, the enemy retreats and the danger becomes less apparent. But I think it takes a lot of intentional effort to be able to maintain this kind of unity without the danger, without the threat, the external threat.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, when we look even at the Great Law of Peace, the teachings of the Great Law of Peace, it says something very similar. Their ultimate three tenets are peace, righteousness, and unity. Everything depends on unity. Every statement in the Thanksgiving address ends with, and now our minds and our hearts are one. So when you say that with a group of people, there's that agreement. And the beauty of any time, I think, that we make a statement, say a prayer, gather, and the intention is that we will all understand that we are all one, then that is what raises our consciousness. It's exactly that. And I think that when the teachings of the Haudenosaunee, the teachings of other Native Americans, the teachings of the Sufis, the teachings of Kabbalah all start to echo each other, these are all teachings that are, like you said earlier, universal. And it becomes very important for us to focus in on the goodness of being universal. I mean, I think I mentioned last week when I was talking about one of the sessions, I was talking about Great Law of Peace. When I first heard it taught by Tom Porter, he was very, very clear that according to their teachings, there is no such thing as a holy war. There is no such thing as war in the name of God. There is only the good mind and the quick mind. And the quick mind is what we describe as the egoistic mind. It's the mind that's always making a decision and making a choice based on what's the most immediate, on I want it now, my way, my way, my way. The good mind is the mind that constantly seeks to be connected to the Creator, that's constantly looking at being grateful for what we have and not worried about what we don't have. And in that gratitude, being able to make connections with other people.
Yeah. So, I think this war, I mean, if you look at it, it's definitely not a holy war, but I do feel that it's necessary. I know that there are a lot of people in the world right now that are very angry at Israel, and we're probably angry at Israel right from day one that it started. Right. But most people here in Israel, including my most leftist friends that are very pro-Palestinian, everybody feels the necessity of getting rid of Hamas, which is a very clear threat to our civilians.
Yes.
Yeah, and at the same time, I can feel a sorrow for the necessity of war, that we haven't been able to create alternative solutions and alternative realities, really, through the unity and awareness within Israel. Like I know, because I've been studying this for 15 years, my teacher has been calling for this awakening within Israeli society for years and years and years. And he's been saying, if we don't do it, if we don't connect, if we don't unite, if we don't bring peace and solutions to the world will turn against us. And a second Holocaust could be possible, and world wars, and God forbid, all kinds of things that our sages also talk about in their prophecies. So I've been completely aware of the danger that could take place, even though I have to say that it's always a shock when something like that happens. But I've been hearing about the danger, and I've been wanting to spread this awareness in our society. And you can always feel like, oh, what if I've done more? But I think we have to look forward and into the future and think, what can we do now to like you were saying in the beginning, so that we would never have to experience this sort of thing again. And I know that we can prevent war. We can prevent it. And the solutions exist on a higher level of consciousness in the connection between us. That's where we draw these higher solutions into our world, because they're not there right now. And personally, I've tried to fix the conflict in the Middle East, right? For many years, I was in advocacy for Israel, and I was in politics before I found Kabbalah. And I could really, really see how the solutions do not exist on this level of thinking that we're at. It's not about Israel stopping the it's not about a ceasefire. It's not about a two-state solution. These things that people think are going to solve the situation, they're not, because until we have a higher level of consciousness in Israel, between Jews, and then also that will ripple to the rest of this region, we won't have peace. We just won't. And I think it's nature itself won't let us achieve it, because it wants us to evolve. It wants to push us to the real solution, which, by the way, is so much better than anything we could achieve in our on this corporeal level.
Right. And so much exactly the ideal that a lot of young people are talking about. It's just that I feel like with young people, they have been brainwashed into this sort of Marxist view which has never worked. And interesting that Marx is Jewish. I don't know why. That just really is fascinating to me, that we've got all these, pro-Hamas, very left-wing Marxists who think we need to replace democracy with, again, an elitist government that's going to boss everybody around. Like you said earlier, coercion that works not with power, not with real power, but with force. And I think that they have just been, we now are finding out in the United States that they have been completely brainwashed in colleges and universities all around the country. So I just want to tell everybody we're going to go way over time. I'm going to ignore my producer, Bobby, and just continue with this discussion. So if you just come back to us if you need to leave. It's going to go over the usual half hour, because I think we just need to continue on with Tal. And I just wanted also to say that this type of brainwashing that we're seeing is not unusual. It's happened many times before. Hitler pulled it off. A man named Andy Andrews wrote a book titled "How Do You Kill 11 Million People?" And basically what he did in the book is he came out, right, and said, you lie to them. So that is what Hitler did. And he outlined how he did it, what he said, and we're hearing a lot of this same sort of rhetoric now. And I think that it's important to understand that, when we look at what the Haudenosaunee describe as a good leader, they talk about the character qualities: peaceful, kind, respectful, responsible, honest, unselfish, humble, open-minded, never asked for power, love your family. So when you look at those character qualities that they're looking at to choose their leaders, and they did manage to live in peace for over 1,000 years, and they did manage to have a tremendous influence on the U.S. Constitution. So I feel like when we look at, and especially with Israel, with us we're coming into a crazy election cycle. But when I have friends that say to me, well, how do we fix all this? I say to them, go with your heart. Don't give up. Politics is not the solution to the problem. Government is not the solution. It's often the problem. I can't remember which famous person said that. But it's when we start to put the Creator and our faith and our spirituality back into our decision making, then we can make these decisions that can affect this change, this correction that needs to be made. And when we're not making those decisions out of fear, which is what's happening in this country with, no, we got to vote right or left, we got to vote Democrat or Republican, that's the problem. You know, the problem is this sort of bilateral approach to everything, where we really need a multilateral approach, and we really need to approach our decision making from a space of love and unity. What is the best way to get to that higher consciousness? And it's never, ever, ever forcing somebody to do what you want. Every government, anything that has ever worked from force, not from the true power of love and unity and putting others before yourself, from selflessness, no government that has ever operated from that has ever survived. And they won't, and they will continue not to survive. Unfortunately, the real fear for so many of us is that our governments nowadays have weapons that can destroy the entire world. And I think that's a fear that young people have. I certainly think it is a fear that well, all of us have that, especially those of us who have children in our families. It's interesting that among the Haudenosaunee, one of the reasons their leaders have to be married with 3 children is they believe that men especially are not unselfish until they have children. So unless we're thinking about the next 7 generations, what kind of decisions are we really making that are going to be good for the next 7 generations? Unless we have that connection of love and family, can our decision making really be fair and proper and correct us?
Wow, yeah. Well, you said a lot, and I just resonated with everything you said. What can I add? So first, regarding Marx, I once heard that he actually was a very educated Jew, and that a lot of the things he wrote were correct, except the way that it was interpreted again was the wrong way. It was taken and realized in the wrong way. But the concepts themselves of unity and the concepts of camaraderie and mutual interdependence, these are good concepts. The question is how are we going to bring them about?
Right.
And then Bala Sulam, who's a great Kabbalist, a great sage, amazing writings. He writes about what happened in Russia and why it failed so badly, and how I feel like the major problem that we have in our world, in our societies, is a lack of awareness of our human nature, like our internal psychology. How do human beings work on the inside?
Right.
And then understanding how our societies work, therefore, and having that awareness. Because what happens is, especially with I think we're seeing it now with the progressive culture, and how you have all these campus students who are supporting Hamas in the name of liberal values. You're seeing a kind of like a lack of awareness of really basic things about human beings, understanding motivations, understanding intentions, understanding culture, and a real lack of self-awareness of our own hatred. Because you're seeing, especially I especially see this on the progressive left, a complete focus on the wrongs of other people, like somebody else is wrong, and never considering that perhaps I myself am harboring hatred within my heart, because they're speaking in the name of liberalism, right? In the name of goodness, and kind of taking upon themselves this kind of higher, like from a higher pedestal, we are the good, and never aware that perhaps they're being racist, or they're being hateful, or they are being anti-Semitic, and so on. So I think this lack of self-awareness comes from we're not being taught these spiritual tools that will enable us to see our darkness, to see our shadow, right? To see ourselves correctly, because we're not doing this kind of self-scrutiny, and people are being indoctrinated 100%. People are being indoctrinated, but they're able to be indoctrinated because they don't have any alternative education that really roots them in the principles of nature, the principles of human psychology, like really understanding our world in a very strong way so that nobody can come along and just easily feed you lies.
Right.
And it's interesting to see that people who do have alternatives, like people who are more religious, they have an alternative philosophy of life, and so they're less easily indoctrinated. And I see this in Israel, that people who are more religious have been less inclined to believe all kinds of fantasies about peace with with Hamas, or peace with, they're just more rooted in reality in a sense.
Right.
And they preserve the principles of the family, like you said, and things that are so important for human life. They kind of remained in a kind of rational place of understanding, differentiating good from bad, which so many people in our world today can't do.
No, they can't. It's like, what's that term? It's like a cognitive dissonance in the whole world. We just had a college campus where this conservative group put up and they are a conservative Christian group, is my understanding, and they were commemorating the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was huge, freed millions and millions of people, right? When communism fell, when the Soviet Union fell, and they put up an art structure of the Berlin Wall falling, and the other students vandalized it. These progressive left students, they're a progressive left professor, lost his mind. Like he's like, he called them names. These are students on your own campus who just happen to disagree with your point of view, but to deface a commemoration of the fall of the Berlin Wall, which, one more time, let me say this, freed millions and millions of people, reunited East and West Germany. A part of the other problem is they don't know history. There's no history taught anymore. There's a version of history that the people who are trying to manipulate our young people are teaching. And it's like you said, they don't have the spiritual background, nor I think sometimes even the physical ability to delineate when somebody is lying to them and when somebody isn't. Spending so much time looking at screens and not sitting and talking face to face with people, which is my mission, is to get people back to talking face to face to each other. Because of that, we don't even recognize the cues, the physical cues of when somebody's lying to you. And if somebody goes off like this professor did into this angry rant, then we're not seeing that is not productive. That anger is not leading us anywhere. Staying in that anger and getting more people angry and defacing a work of art and defacing a commemorative effort to say how wonderful it was that people were freed from their servitude to the state, freed from prisons, having been political prisoners and thrown into prisons. It's one of the things that boggles our mind here in the United States is this talk about how, yes, we have to go towards communism and we have to go towards Marxism. You can't march around in China or even Russia, which is technically supposed to be a democracy, but but you can't march around in China or in the Gaza against Hamas. You can't march around and say what you really want to say without getting thrown into prison or murdered. Same thing, you can't march in Iran. Look what happened to the young people that demonstrated when that woman was killed because she had her hijab on incorrectly. And there was almost no publicity here over that. The only marches that happened in the United States over that happening in Iran were in the Iranian American communities. This was not taken up by the left, this cause. And I think that is part of the problem. If you're supposed to be for women's rights, if you're supposed to be for abortion rights, if you're supposed to be for the rights of human beings, if you're supposed to, if this is what you say you are marching for, then why are you not looking at what has been written? Like I think I told you, bin Laden's letter to America went viral. But of course, the part where he talks about how one of the reasons he felt like he had to fight against America was because of their approval of homosexuality and abortions, and women should be in the kitchen, not at work outside the home. So it's like there's a stop short of where we're looking at our own hypocrisy, and I think that is what young people don't realize. It actually energetically, spiritually weakens them tremendously, because they're just looking at their definition of oppressor and oppressed. Talk to the people. Read Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Talk to the people that the Soviet Union imprisoned when you deface a work of art that's celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall. They just don't know.
Yeah, and I see this in Israel as well. There has been a lot of this in Israel as well, and this last blow that we received has kind of shaken people to snap out of a lot of this, this kind of, like you're saying, this thinking that is undermining our own safety and our own existence. This is what happens with thinking, like with the extreme left joining up with the fundamentalist Islam. It's counterproductive towards your own existence, right? You're working against your very own existence, let alone your values. So we've had a lot of this here in Israel as well. And it's really hard to fight. I think there's a lot of money behind a lot of this brainwashing, and that we can't really see. And it's in the media. It's very hard, and it usually hits the academia, right? The more educated levels of society. I think often because they're less religious and less rooted in these strong kind of principles that protect people from this sort of brainwash. And then I think what can really protect us and help us, because it's really futile to try and speak rationally to somebody who's been through this brainwashing. I think the only thing that can really help is if we, the people who can feel the solution is in higher consciousness, to work on ourselves, to elevate ourselves, and to connect as many people as possible, to come together. And by doing that, we are pulling up the consciousness of humanity.
Right.
And I think that is the only thing, we have to work from the inside. The only thing that can change reality for the better. I've seen it in my family, unfortunately. I've tried to talk to people, and I felt like they can't hear me. Even now, there's a lot of things where they can't hear me. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the only way that I can help, I really feel like I need to help them, because they don't see that they're working against themselves. So the only way I can help them is by doing my work, my inner work with the people who can hear me, and then working to bring as much unity to our societies. Because just to finalize this point, if we're connected, if we're able to listen to each other, like you were saying, Maddie, then we become immune to manipulations of any kind, whether it's from the left or the right, it doesn't matter.
Right.
We become immune to this whole divide and conquer sort of thing that's being played on us. And we become free from tyranny of any sort.
Right.
And that is the true key to democracy. People think if we go out on the street and bash the government and try and overthrow our government, that's going to bring us democracy. And I think that's completely opposite, because we never know who are the forces behind the scenes that are trying to take power, and that probably they're not the nicest ones. They're probably just as egoistic, if not more so, than the ones that you're trying to overthrow. And rather, we have to come together with people who think differently from the other side of the political spectrum. And that together, when we come together, that's how we protect our societies from any type of tyranny. That's how we protect our democracy, which really is all about pluralism. It's all about
Right.
being able to speak your mind and to accept other people as well, and to live together in peace and freedom. And today, unfortunately, freedom and peace, all these liberal concepts are being used when really what the people who are using them are pushing us into dictatorship regimes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
So we
you're
have to come together. That's the only way.
it is the only way. It absolutely is. So I just want to relate to you and the audience about my experience last night. So I teach Native American cultures from the plains and from the eastern woodlands, which includes the Haudenosaunee and the Great Law of Peace with kids. And last night we were talking about lacrosse. So lacrosse, the other one of the names for lacrosse, and most people that play lacrosse have no idea that it was invented by the Haudenosaunee and is originally called, speaking of getting the creator into things, is originally called the creator's game. That so in their language, Dewa Aladu means the creator's game, because they believe that the creator gave them the game of lacrosse to train boys to become men so that they could do what they needed to do. And when they came together to live in peace and couldn't settle a disagreement in the Grand Council or in a clan council or a national council, that by talking to each other, they would bring their best players and they would play a really tough game of lacrosse. And they used to play on fields like 1 to 7 miles long, in and out of the woods, in and out of each other's villages. But they had all the honor to agree that whoever won the game won the disagreement. That was it. The end. We're done. No more. We can't talk it out. We're going to play it out, and then we're done. And the kids it's so interesting how this year especially, the kids, and I don't know if they're hearing it at home, which would be a shame. I really hope they're not hearing too much about what's the wars or above where they can understand it, like too much news on. I hope that's not happening above their cognitive level. But they really constantly, almost every day, I hear the question, why do adults always have to go to war? Why do we have to have wars? And so I did want to ask you, what do your children ask that? Or when you're with children, what is your approach to them when they ask a question like that? And of course, when the kids that we're teaching hear about how lacrosse was used to settle wars, and even the Cherokee used stickball, which is similar to lacrosse, how so long ago, 1,000 years ago, people had made that transition away from war. How come we're not all there now? So I just wanted to ask you that question. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not easy for the kids. Obviously, we try to shield them as much as possible from the news, but they hear a lot. We have missiles bombarding our cities, so we have to run to the shelter every so often. And so we have to explain to them, why are people trying to kill us? Why are there missiles being thrown at us? And there is a lot of fear and anxiety, of course. So I mean, from a very young age, I've been teaching my children concepts of Kabbalah in a simple language, and I explain to them that human nature is ego, and that when we are not working to correct it, we're not working to unite and to teach the wisdom of connection, then people fight each other because of human nature, because of the ego. And then when we're in the shelter, we'll often open a book of Zohar or something, and we'll read something and we'll pray together for connection in Israel and connection in the world and for peace. And I think for me as an adult, knowing that there is something I can do to change my reality, to influence my reality, it gives me a sense of empowerment and helps me not feel like a helpless victim. And also, I think to my kids, when obviously it's not as easy for them to understand, but when I give them that sense that if we pray, that if we work to spread this idea of connection, then we can change the world, then I think it gives them a sense of hope. Although I have to say it's definitely not easy when the corporeal reality is so strong. It's so scary.
Yeah, I remember when, I listen to on YouTube everything that Kabu puts up, and I love that they've been doing these readings from the Zohar on peace, and it's been very beautiful. And at the end of this, I'd like you to give any connection to that. And if so, for those of you that are listening that are interested in Kabbalah, are interested in this particular approach, there's some beautiful stuff up there from Kabu, which Tal is a part of, and I really think that is exactly the kind of thing to do with children. I love your answer to this, that we sit and we pray with them and we talk about it with them, because they need to feel like they are not victims. And I think that is one of the huge problems we have in the whole world and the way that people get manipulated is that they are constantly told that you're a victim, you have no power, you're a victim. And those people over there are the ones oppressing you. And so since you're their victim, that's who you have to fight against. And that victim mentality has no power. It gives you no personal power. Whereas if we're talking to children and giving them a feeling that they are empowered by prayer or by the teachings of their parents or people that are older and wiser, I think that's a brilliant approach to take, so that they feel that inner power.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's we, the adults, who have to feel empowered, and also just the sense of connectedness of communities can give a lot of security. We have a spiritual community, like you said. I'm part of a Kabbalistic community here in Israel, and it's worldwide, like you said, through Kabu. And just having that sense of connection to other people who are supporting one another, and we're connecting on Zoom a few times a day, and we're praying together, and we are activating our spiritual power to influence our reality. And there's a lot of support going on. And so that is a huge power for our mental health, to have the support of a community, the support of a group, the support of friends, and to not be going through anything alone. And I see this also happening in Israel, throughout Israel, that this unity that is happening in Israel, it's an amazing phenomenon, by the way. Whenever there's a war here, that unity that is hidden within the soul of Israel comes out. And you see how people who were so divided before suddenly are so close, like family. Everybody's helping, everybody's volunteering.
Wow.
We've had an amazing spirit of recruitment, people coming from abroad so that they can go to war and serve their country, people helping in every way possible, sending food, sending equipment to the soldiers, everything they could do. And so this sense of togetherness, I think it's the most powerful thing for any person, any community, and any nation to be able to overcome fear and overcome anxiety. And so the more that we can support each other, I actually even heard a psychologist talk about it, how in this war, he's seen how the psychologists themselves, the therapists themselves, have not been as effective, both because they themselves were very shocked and anxious about the situation, but also because he noticed how it was just simply much more powerful to have simple togetherness and simple heart-to-heart connection to aid people who were affected directly by the massacre. And so this concept of human connection is really so important, even to our mental health and to our emotional well-being, and of course to our children and to everybody who is around us.
Yes, and Americans are famous for that too. We're famous for coming together when there's a disaster in the world, when there's a disaster at home. We're famous when we're pushed into it for coming together. The problem is what you said is once the disaster's over, can we stay together? So, Tal, I just want to ask you if you could give your contact info, please, and COBU's contact info, just any info for people who might be now interested and inspired to find out more about this connection.
Yeah, so you can find me at www.choosingtoconnect.com. I have a course called The Shift, which really helps you understand the shift that wants to take place in our world and to undergo it yourself step by step. It gives you a really good kind of understanding of the process and an emotional connection to this transformation. So you're welcome to contact me. And of course, there's COBU, which is an international community of people who are studying Kabbalah, people who are from every religion and every language and country you can think of, which is an amazing experience in itself to be part of such a community. I think COBU, if you just Google that, you'll find it.
Yeah.
Or Kabbalah.info is another website you can go to.
And check them out on YouTube because beautiful, wonderful, inspiring things on peace up there now. So everybody, thank you so much for being with us for this very special edition of Home Improvement for the Soul. You can find me at MaddieCheers.com, M-A-D-D-I, Cheers, CHEERS.com, one word, and womensoneness.com. And please join me on the Women's Oneness Project, my Facebook group. We do poetry and prayers every Sunday morning at 10. I'm going to forego the usual closure with a poem today from the Mandala Meditations, and you can check that out. I'll post it up on Facebook. Thank you, Tal. I can't even imagine what you're all going through, but we're all here praying for you, your family, and everyone in Israel and the Gaza, that this is resolved peacefully with as little damage as possible. And that I cannot thank you enough for being with us to do this special edition so that we can hear what is truly going on. And I can't help but think of how when I was watching one of the YouTube videos from COBU, one of the first things they said was, you're going to have to forgive us if the sirens go off and we have to go to the shelters. And you brought up how you and your family are going through that. So let us all pray that this ends soon and peacefully for everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. I want to thank you and everybody who's listening. And just to say that it's exactly that. If we pray for connection and for our evolution to happen into more connected states of being as a humanity, then we can definitely influence what's happening in Israel for the better, what's happening everywhere for the better. And we really are all one.
Yes.
So everything we're going through, may we go through it swiftly in a conscious way and through the path of light and awareness, so that we have to suffer as least as possible. And thank you, Maddie, for allowing this conversation to take place and for your work to help the consciousness of humanity to rise, because it's such an important thing to do for all of us. Thank you, Maddie.
Oh, my pleasure. My mission. my gift from the Creator to be on this mission, to have this. I just turned 70, and for this to be my mission and my true place at the end of my life, where I feel like, a lot of people kind of give up. I feel like I'm completely re-energized from all of this. So thank you again, Tal. Thank you, everybody who's listening. I wish you all peace and love, and I hope you have a beautiful and wonderful Thanksgiving. And please don't forget to hug your kids, hug your family, and list all the things that you're grateful for. Love you all. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us for Home Improvement for the Soul. If you'd like more information, please go to womensoneness.com or MaddieCheers.com. That's womensoneness.com or MaddieCheers.com. See you on the next episode.